All right, if you have your Bibles this morning, I'd invite you to take them and turn to Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16. We're going to continue our series on the greatest stories ever told. These are the parables of Jesus in the New Testament. And last week we looked at the parable of the Good Samaritan. This week we're going to look at a different parable. And I was praying in my car a few weeks back. If you ever pray in your car, it used to be that if you prayed out loud in your car and you were alone, people might look at you and think there was something the matter with you. Think you're talking to yourself. But thanks to Bluetooth and hands-free, now when you're praying out loud in your car, people just think you're talking to somebody on the phone, and it's great. So it's a true story. I don't even know that I told my family this. Several weeks back, I was praying in the car, and these words came out of my mouth at the beginning of the prayer. And this may really suck all the hope you have for me as a pastor away. But these are the words that came out of my mouth. I said, Dear Lord, you may know more about this than I do. And then when I hit that far into prayer, I thought to myself, that's the dumbest thing I've ever said. I literally said that out loud in the car. And so I'm praying to God, and then I tried to recover from that. How do you recover as you're talking to God? Like, okay, God, wait a minute, I'm sorry. You do know more than I do. Yeah. What do you say at that point? So I'm praying, and I tried to recover. But this morning, we are going to look at a parable that's really, really hard to understand. It is a parable that has caused a lot of people difficulty in understanding it because it seems like Jesus is condoning certain things that he shouldn't be condoning. And rest assured this morning that God knows more than we do. And he knows exactly what we need to know when it comes to this truth today, this parable. And so our prayer is that through looking at this, that we are going to we're going to grow and we're going to be stretched. Remember, parables were given because the religious people were pushing against Jesus. He began to teach in parables because the people who didn't want to hear couldn't understand, and those who did would understand. And so we understand the uniqueness of parables, and we have that again today. We'll see that again today. So the scene is like this. If you go back a couple chapters, Luke 14, about verse 25, we see that large crowds are following Jesus. So a lot of people are following Jesus, and among those gathered close to him as he's walking and the crowds are following him are the disciples, of course. There's also, we know from Luke, the beginning of Luke 15, verse 1, tax collectors and sinners are there. They want to hear what he has to say. So you have the disciples, you have those. And then you also, we know from Luke 15 too, that you have the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the religious folks. They're nearby as well, but they're kind of not too close, just at a distance, just to listen in enough to be angry with him, to grumble against him. And so that is kind of the scene. Luke 16:14 in our passage at the end, it says the Pharisees who loved money heard all this. What they hear? They heard what the parable we're going to look at. And it says they were sneering at Jesus. So once again, what Jesus is sharing, the truth of the kingdom of heaven to people who are, in this case, trying to live their lives by justifying themselves through works, through religiosity, through trying to be religious, ritualistic, trying to, be justified in that way. They come away angry. They come away sneering. But today's story is about being right before God once again. And what we're going to talk about this morning is whether we're in the business for us on this earth, in business for ourselves, or if we're in business for heaven. In business for ourselves, or we're in business for heaven. You see, The question is, how does our earthly activity and our decisions and our finances and our time management and all the rest touch eternity? How does it impact eternity? The decisions we're making now have an eternal impact, especially this is really talking to followers of Christ. When I was a number of years ago, my first job out of college, I worked in South Florida for Motorola. And I remember I was called into ministry. I'd worked there about 4 years, and God radically changed my life and gave me a call into ministry. And I was going to go back to school, and I was sitting with the human resources people ready to leave. And I was sitting there and ready to leave, and they were asking me what I wanted to do, and they said, and what I was going to do, I explained, and they said, well, why don't you take a leave of absence? You can always come back. You'll retain your seniority. You'll retain all these things. And I said, oh, no. I said, I'm here to sever. I'm like, cut the cord, cut the ties, cut me off like a mud turtle. I've been called by God. I am going on my way. And they tried to reason with me. They said, maybe you don't know. You never know what God's going to do. They didn't say that. They said, you never know what's going to happen. You may come back. It probably makes the most sense. And I said, no. I said, I want to just leave. And so, wouldn't you know, months later, I was there could I please have my vacation? Could I please have this back? I did go back. After my first semester, I had several months break, and I went back to work there. And I learned the lesson that the decision you make today can really have an impact on what happens tomorrow. It's true in this life. But this morning, what we're going to see is how true the decisions that we make as believers impact eternal things. And God wants us to understand it through the Word. Luke 16, verse 1, the beginning of the parable, Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The man's getting fired. He's being let go because he was wasteful. And he was a manager. And the Greek word for manager is it's a compound word. It's the word house with another word, and the other word that it has as its root law. So think of house law. So this man he keeps the law of the house. For the master, he runs the house. For the master, he's the treasurer. He manages the people. He keeps things going. He manages the master's house and life and business. And he's getting fired. Why is he getting fired? Because it says he was wasteful. The wasteful means he's spending this money frivolously. He's spending it uselessly. He's throwing it away. The word wasteful is the same idea as if you took grain and you were throwing grain in the air. So the grain would fall down and the wind would blow away the chaff, and the heavier grain would just fall to the ground. So that same word is the word used for wasteful. It's like we would say he's throwing money away. The master found out this guy's throwing your money away. So he said, you're fired. It's the same word that when if you've ever heard of the parable that's in Luke 15 of the prodigal son, the word where the prodigal son took his inheritance and squandered it, that's what this guy's doing. Same word. And so the master hears about it. He says, you can no longer be manager, but he does an interesting thing. He says, listen, I'm not sure where things are at. I'm going to give you some time. I want you to give an account back to me. Tell me where we're really at now after all you've done. And so because of this, he has some time while he's still kind of managing before he's totally done. Verse 3. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do when I lose my job here. People will welcome me into their houses. So he called each one of his master's debtors. And in the story, he's calling each one, and we have two examples. So he's calling each one of his master's debtors, And he asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. Some of your translations may say 100 baths or 100 measures. A bath would be 9 gallons, so this translation, 900 gallons. This is a lot of olive oil. This is not a small farm. This is the produce from a large, large farm. This is a very wealthy master. And this is just one of the debtors, and he owes him 900 gallons. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly." Notice he wants to get this done fast. Sit down quickly, make it 450. The number of growing seasons to replenish, to pay back even 450 gallons would be many, many growing seasons. Imagine how happy this man would be. He is elated. "Sure, I'll write that. We're good. I'm good with this." So that's the first debtor, and he relieves half of what he owes. When I was in junior high, I used to walk to about 20 minutes back and forth to junior high school, and right in the middle there was a Mr. Hero. And we would stop there often on the way back, and at the Mr. Hero, we would maybe eat something, play a video game or two, back in the days of Pac-Man and old school. And so we would play a video game or two, and a young man began to work there. His name was Scott. It was interesting because Scott, my mom's friend's daughter, started to date Scott. And so it was kind of interesting because Scott wanted to make a good impression for me for reasons I don't really know. So I would go in there to get, play the game, eat some food, and he would start to give me, "Hey, here's a hot buttered steak." If you've ever been to Mr. Hero, it's amazing. It's a kind of a steak-'em sandwich, and it's got cheese, grilled onions, mushrooms. How you doing this morning? And they'd put something on it that they called butter. I don't know what it was, but it was amazing. And then they had another thing called a Roman burger, and it was basically a hamburger with these toppings. And then they'd put a piece of fried salami on a hamburger. Sounds unhealthy. That will change your life. So he would start giving this to me, and I was happy to receive it. I'm in the 8th grade or whatever. So I'm like, "Scott, you are the man. You're the man." For a Roman burger, I was elated. And so this guy we're talking in large, large measure, relieving the debt. But here's the thing. Scott was giving away Roman burgers that weren't his to give. I was happy. Scott seemed like the man. But I'm sure if the owner knew, the owner wouldn't be happy. And this manager's giving away things that aren't his. Verse 7, he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill, make it 800. And this is where the parable becomes really hard to understand if you don't look closely. It becomes interesting because verse 8, the first part, the master commended, and it says very clearly, the dishonest. He's unjust. He's wrong in what he's doing. But he gets commended by the master because of his shrewdness, because of his wisdom. Though he's dishonest or unjust, and this catches us off guard, Jesus is telling this parable, and it seems like this guy's dishonest, and what's going on? The master's not happy about what he's done, but he sees how clever this is, and he commends him for that. And that's where Jesus begins to give us some points that we need to understand to live by. Number one is this: it's wise to use worldly wealth to reach souls. Look at verse 8 again, halfway through. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. And look at it again. The people of this world, these are unbelievers. These are people who don't follow God. And they're compared to the people of the light. These are people who follow God. The people who don't follow God, this is what Jesus is saying, are more shrewd. They're more wise, and the word means wise, in dealing with their own kind than the people of the light, than those who follow God. Think believers. What's the point? Christians, we're not always as wise as we should be. And so the Word of God is prompting us this morning to be shaken a little bit, to think again and get wise. So using the example, this manager's shrewdness, Jesus says this is it's a clever way to use what he had, and we can learn from it. But we just have to be careful, and this is where we have to be careful. We have to be careful the lesson that we learn. We can't learn the wrong lesson because we walk away and we'll walk away in a bad place. We have to learn the right lesson. Is Jesus condoning dishonesty? No, he's not. It's the last thing he would do. But he is condoning something else, and we have to dig and listen and search and want to know, and when we want to know, we'll know. That's how parables work. What are you saying, Lord, through this? That's what we need to ask. And Jesus is condoning the use of earthly wealth. We need to look at what it looks like. So what happened? The manager took what he had. What did he have? He didn't have much at this point. All the manager had was temporary, very short-lived control of a situation of kind of these debtors and their situation, very short-lived. He had that control for a short time. That's all he had, and he used what he had to make some changes. He made some friends, and the hope was that this is what would happen. That one day they would say, hey, you're the guy. You're the guy. You're that guy, 450 gallons. I can't even thank you enough. We named our son Claude after you. We can't thank you enough. Come on in here. Sit down. Come on, take a rest. Hey, let's get some food. Bring some of the Krispy Kreme donuts. Come on, let's be nice to this guy. It's welcoming him in and making him feel great. That is what's happening. The story says he used what little he had so that he could make friends that would welcome him in. What does that mean for us? Verse 9. I tell you, this is Jesus to us now. Let's get the right lesson. I tell you, he says, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves so that when it is gone, let me just stop there. When will worldly wealth be completely gone in the context of this? It will be gone. We can't take it with us when we go to be with the Lord, when we move to eternity. As sons and daughters of the light, we should be hearing this so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. The picture is clear. You and I are using all that we have at our disposal so that we can see as many people as possible go to be with the Lord to a place in eternity. I love this. It means that we can be creative, we can be enterprising, we can be as wise as we can be to take what we have. It may be a lot or it may be a little, but we take whatever we have and act shrewdly and wisely on this earth with our possessions and our belongings so that we're welcome into eternal dwelling. This is an awesome picture. We can plan all kinds of things. We can plan a house. We can plan a retirement. We can plan a vacation. We can plan a wedding or an event. We can plan all kinds of things. Why not take the same ability and plan to the nth degree how we can do all we can do to see many people go to be with the Lord? John 14, verse 2, my Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? Jesus is going to prepare a place. It's going to be a beautiful place. He is planning an awesome place. And that is where believers will go and dwell one day. And the picture is this: when we are wise, we'll use all we have on this earth, all that we are able to manage so that as many people as possible can go there. Other people are doing it so we can go there. And one day in eternity, the picture will be like this. Hey, You're that guy. Hey, you're that gal. You're the reason I'm here. Come on in. Sit down. I named my daughter Claudia after you. Sit down, have some Krispy Kreme donuts. In heaven, they're always warm. They're always fluffy. Come on in. Sit down and just stay a while. So you're welcomed by people in eternity. What we do here in terms of dealing wisely with what God has given to us, Jesus is saying we need to be wise enough to realize that we should do all we can to see as many people there. And the times that we'll have there are beyond our wildest imagination when we're welcomed in and sitting down, or when we're welcoming people in and sitting down in these Jesus-made dwellings in eternity. That's the first point. The second point is earth is just practice for heaven. Verse 10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little, when you see the word very little, by the way, I want you to think worldly wealth. Whoever's dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Who's going to trust you with treasures in heaven if you can't take what God has given you on this earth, and I can't take it and we can't use it wisely? How's God going to trust us with something in eternity? Earthly stewardship, we have this on the screen in the notes. Earthly stewardship leads to heavenly recognition. Earthly stewardship leads to heavenly recognition. Verse 17 of Luke 19, another parable, Jesus says, "Well done, my good servant." His master replied, "Because you've been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities." Jesus' rule in eternity, Jesus reigning and ruling in eternity is very clear. Sometimes what we have trouble with is our place in eternity of leading and ruling and reigning. And there is a place for us in that regard. 2 Timothy 2, verse 11, here's a trustworthy saying: if we died with him, we'll also live with him. We get that. We get that. This is the part that's harder, verse 12. If we endure, we will also reign with him. This is not leadership that's marred by sin, because this is in a perfect atmosphere, the atmosphere in the presence of God and the perfection of heaven. But this is ruling and reigning and leading that has no sin. Heaven is watching now how we handle things as believers, and this is just practice for heaven, because one day when we get there, what we do here will impact even how we are able there to have a place of ruling, reigning, and leadership, what God entrusts to us. The third point from the passage this morning is this: we are managers and Jesus is the master. Look at verse 12. If you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? The manager wasted the master's good. Remember, he was throwing money away. He was throwing it away. And in the end, the point of this, and I want you to see verse 12, if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, this is the reality. It is all God's property. Everything is God's. Everything that we see, that we touch, it is all the Lord's, all his property. It's not ours. So we're just stewards. We're just managers. And this is the perspective that should guide everything we do. But here's the paradox that comes out of this. If we forget that truth, if in the course of the busyness of this life, if we forget we're just stewarding what God has entrusted to us, we don't own it. If we forget that and we think for a moment that it is ours, We think we own it. Here's the paradox, that the moment we slip into thinking we own it, we actually become a servant to it in that moment. We don't own anything. We begin to serve. Look at verse 13. No one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate the one, you'll love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. If you think you own your wealth, think again. Your wealth really owns you. If you think God owns it, you believe God owns everything, then you're serving the right master, and God will be with you to the glory of his holy name throughout your life, faithful in small things, entrusted with many things.